If the world is round, half its people must spend their whole lives upside down. Hello, I'm Patrick Stewart, and that's just one theory we'll hear about in our series, The Shape of the World. Many such fantastic notions were held by philosophers, kings, and explorers who first asked, what is the world made of? Where does it begin? And what are its limits? Through the centuries, people who made maps placed their own country at the center of their universe. And over the next 6 weeks, our series will investigate why people moved beyond that center. Curiosity, security, material wealth, and political dominance. We will share the excitement of discovering new lands and taking part in the adventures of early map makers and surveyors. We will examine how political and economic competition expanded national boundaries. We will highlight the positive uses of our knowledge of the Earth and take a look at its dark side, our potential to destroy the very magnificence we have discovered. The first episode, Heaven and Earth, details how the notion of the world as round finally gained acceptance, despite conflicts between science and religion. It shows how, centuries ago, people imagined uncharted lands and oceans and elegantly, vividly turned those visions into maps. And now, Heaven and Earth, Part 1 of The Shape of the World. In the heart of Java, a unique ceremony is about to begin. The Dukan, or holy man of Chiela village, climbs slowly in the tropical heat to the ancestral graveyard on the slopes of the volcano. The Dukan must seek and be granted the village ancestors' permission before this ceremony can begin. This year, he is initiating his grandson into these ancient rites. The Dukan's preparations are a mixture of Islamic ritual and local folklore. He chants passages from the Quran, while, with a bundle of coconut hair, a dash of incense, and a touch of Eastern magic, he invokes the spirits of the ancestors.
Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad kama barakta ala Sayyidina.
Down below, the villagers of Chiela gather. The Dukan leads them to his house, where the ceremony will take place. Here, once every year, the village unveils and worships its most sacred and time-honored possessions. The first object is a holy dagger, or, as it is called in Indonesia, a kris. But most revered of all, the climax of the whole event is this. It's a map, but no ordinary map. This fragile piece of cotton, over 400 years old, shows how the villages of Chiela once interpreted the world around them. That world was confined to the western third of the island of Java, with the local princedom and its capital, Chiela, in the middle. The map was commissioned by the prince himself. For him, it was a symbol of power, there for everyone to see, the territory which he possessed. The Chiela mapmaker drew an intricate picture of the local territory. But the prince and his people knew little of lands and oceans beyond. Their life and their world was here, its center, the nearby volcano. This is the story of an immense challenge, how different peoples through the ages revealed and mapped the world, from the native village to the entire Earth and universe beyond. Today, we take the shape of the world for granted.
When it comes to doing business worldwide, you gotta think in global proportions. You gotta know how the world turns because you want it to turn your way. You gotta speak their language. You gotta travel with a fast crowd. It's a big world out there, and you gotta do everything you can to make it smaller.
Satellites have shown us a globe spinning in space. But the earliest ideas about the world had nothing to do with satellites or science. They were inspired by religion and the imagination. Some live on today. This is the Buddhist temple of Borobudur in Indonesia. Its galleries recall stories from the scriptures and the lives of the prophet Buddha. But Borobudur is much more. This mighty structure is a map of the Buddhist world, a model of their universe. This universe is built on 3 levels. At the bottom is the earth, where man is trapped by his desires. In the middle, he learns to conquer these material temptations. Finally and triumphantly, he reaches the top, the Buddhist heaven. Here he finds spiritual peace and eternal freedom from earthly wishes. He has reached the destination for pilgrims who travel the imaginary atlas of the Buddhist world. Long ago, the first civilizations tried to make sense of the world. They were driven on by different forces: religion, scientific curiosity, power, and sheer practical need. Imagine the world of ancient Egyptians 5,000 years ago. Then, as now, the River Nile dictated Egyptian life. Today, irrigation of the surrounding plain is controlled by the damming of the river. But in ancient Egypt, it depended on the natural flooding which occurred every year, the result of rains in the faraway mountains, where one branch of the river had its source. This flooding could bring life, or sometimes death, to the crops of the fields. The river's height was such a vital matter to farmers that it was precisely recorded every year on these measuring stones called nilometers. Too high a level could drown the crops. If it was too low, they would turn to dust. The flooding also washed away the boundaries between individual farmers' fields. So every year, official surveyors realigned the lands by stretching ropes from boundary stones. The purpose was political power. It enabled the pharaohs to collect their taxes. The fields could be seen and precisely mapped. But what about the world as a whole? Here the answer lay with the imagination and the gods. The goddess Nut was the mother of the sun. Every night she swallowed it, and at dawn she gave birth to it again. Some believe the sun journeyed across the heavens in a splendid celestial boat. Others that a gigantic beetle rolled the sun before it. The sun lit up the sky which was held aloft by 4 enormous towers at the corners of a flat, rectangular earth. The oldest surviving world map is this tiny Babylonian clay tablet, over 2,500 years old. Earth is a crude, flat disk. But it was the ancient Greeks who, with amazing ingenuity, would hit on the true shape of the world. To do so, they rejected their gods and turned to a vital new force, science. The breakthrough came in the 6th century BC at the city of Miletus on the coast of Asia Minor. Once, before the sea retreated, this was a bustling harbor where ships came and went with all the good things of life. Miletus was a rich metropolis, the New York of its day. Here lived the first people to analyze the world by using reason and science.
I nostri antenati, quando dovevano fare un viaggio per mare, erano soliti pregare gli dei. Facevano dei sacrifici, a volte facevano anche degli sacrifici umani. Invece con Talete, con Anassimandro e Anassimene, si incominciò a studiare il mondo. Talete insegnò ai naviganti a guardare il nord, a indovinare dov'era la stella polare. Anassimandro disegnò la prima carta geografica. Insomma, questi filosofi cercavano di capire com'era fatto il mondo. Oddio, dicevano anche delle grandi sciocchezze. Per esempio, Talete pensava che il mondo fosse una zattera sul mare. Anassimandro invece se lo immaginava come una torta sospesa nel cielo. Ma non è molto importante le loro risposte, quanto importante era il fatto che si ponessero certe domande.
These scientists asked what the world was made of and what did it look like. But rooted on Earth, unable to see beyond the horizon, the answer seemed impossible to come by. The Greeks had one wish that has straddled the ages. From the skyscrapers of New York to the medieval spires of northern Italy, people have always wanted to climb high and look down on Earth.
The engines are on. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit. We have liftoff. Liftoff at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Clear.
Finally, just over 20 years ago, that improbable ambition was achieved. In December 1968, the astronauts of Apollo 8 broke free from Earth's gravity. As they made their epic journey around the moon and back, they became the first human beings to see the world as a whole.
Well, children's first experience with the Earth is as infants crawling around on the floor. It seems to be flat, and yet when we're in early preschool and early education, we're introduced to the thought of the round globe. It's usually sitting up on the teacher's desk. North is always up. The countries are individually marked and colored in different colors. And this sinks in and goes against our intuition of the flat Earth. I was surprised on our flight that even though I had been trained as a pilot, as an astronaut, as a scientist, indeed, about that the Earth was round, it wasn't until I actually looked back and saw the Earth floating in space about 25,000 miles away that it sunk into me, deep into my subconscious, that indeed the Earth was round. It was a individual globe floating out in space.
As they reappeared from behind the moon, the astronauts saw a wondrous sight, an Earthrise. But the ancient Greeks had no opportunity to see such a spectacle. How then could they unravel the mystery of the world? Curiously, the first clue came from music. In the 6th century BC, the Greek Pythagoras imposed order on the universe with one simple discovery. He realized that the length of the string dictated the pitch of a musical note. From this, Pythagoras constructed his ideal universe based on musical intervals. At the center of everything was the Earth. Then, like a montage of Ferris wheels, the heavens moved around it. A tone separated Earth from the Moon, a further semitone to Mercury, and on through the planets, Sun, and stars. Their revolutions created a constant hum, the harmony of the spheres. This is the one and only surviving model of the universe which developed from Pythagoras' leap of the imagination. This celestial globe in Naples is the universe as if we were looking at it from the outside, with Earth at the center. 43 constellations are carved on its surface, the basis on which horoscopes are still predicted. The universe is born by the mythical figure of Atlas.
Il concetto di sfera è un concetto intuitivo e probabilmente anche molto antico, perché se noi osserviamo le stelle circumpolari, cioè le stelle che non tramontano mai dietro l'orizzonte, ma che girano intorno al polo, possiamo osservare che queste descrivono archi di cerchio. Quindi è ovvio che se tutte queste stelle descrivono archi di cerchio, tutti questi archi di cerchio sono collocati su una sfera. Quindi è intuitivo immaginare che la sfera rappresenti il luogo nel quale sono raccolte tutte queste stelle.
One thing followed. If the universe beyond was full of spheres, Earth itself must also be a sphere. Further proofs came. The Greeks noticed that during a lunar eclipse, the shadow cast by Earth was curved. The next mystery was the size of this round world. An intriguing phenomenon near the town of Aswan on the banks of the Nile inspired an astonishingly accurate solution. The key was this ancient well. The date is June the 21st, the summer solstice. The sun beats down remorselessly. In the 3rd century BC, a Greek named Eratosthenes had heard that at midday the sun shone directly overhead, leaving no shadow as it beamed into the well. The passing of the sun directly overhead was the first element in Eratosthenes' calculation. The second was a distance, worked out by camel. The port of Alexandria was 50 days' camel ride to the north of Aswan, about 500 miles, as a camel traveled 10 miles a day. The third element was a pole called a gnomon. With it, Eratosthenes measured the length of the sun's shadow also at midday on the very same date, June the 21st, in Alexandria. With the well, the camel distance, and the angle of his gnomon's shadow, the ingenious Eratosthenes worked out that the world was 24,663 miles round, only 200 miles outside the true figure we know today. The Greek scientists had discovered Earth's shape and size. Now they gathered here in the city of Alexandria to answer the next burning question. What lay on Earth? What lands? What seas? These questions could only be answered by piecing together the stories and observations of travelers and merchants. Alexandria, a Mediterranean crossroads, was uniquely placed to pool their information. Its catacombs, with their carvings and statues, are the best remaining evidence of a melting pot of ancient cultures. This Roman head, for example, is sitting on a body wearing Egyptian dress. Above all, Alexandria housed the Royal Library. It owned 500,000 works, the storehouse of ancient knowledge. All that remains today are the underground vaults with niches in the walls where parchments were once stored. While most of these manuscripts disappeared, the reputation of one man who worked here in the 2nd century AD would last forever. His name was Claudius Ptolemy. His fame rests on the writings he left behind. One was called the Geography. In maps later recreated from his calculations can be seen the world of Ptolemy, the peak of Greek learning. The precise outline of Europe and the Mediterranean, Spain and Portugal, Italy, and Britain, though Scotland is laid oddly on its side. Ptolemy, with his lines from north to south and east to west, imposed the grid we still use to map the world today. But there are errors too. Ptolemy could only guess at the source of the Nile, as no one had gone that far into Africa. So at its end, he invented the mountains of the moon, which explorers were still seeking only 100 years ago. He made the Indian Ocean a great lake, and created a 4th southern continent to balance the northern landmass. Ptolemy and the earlier Greeks whose knowledge he inherited understood how to map the world. They were simply thwarted by a lack of information. For the farther sailors and travelers ventured from their base in the Mediterranean, the more likely they were to face shipwreck, hostility, and death. The most tantalizing mystery lay to the east. There were signs at the edge of the known world of a fabulous civilization. The evidence was the exquisite silk which had traveled from the land of the Syries, the Silk people. A tiny caterpillar was the tenuous link between the two greatest civilizations of the ancient world. China, Chung-Ko, meaning the Middle Kingdom, proud, introverted, splendid in its isolation. It was an extraordinary combination, a fiercely centralized bureaucracy propelled by the sheer inventiveness of the imperial subjects, most colorfully displayed in the pressing and weaving of silk.
相传呢，中国有那个古代那个轩辕皇帝，轩辕皇帝他的这个妃子呢叫蕊祖。有一次呢，他就在花园里玩，那么这时候有一个宫女呢，就倒了一杯水端给他。那么恰好呢，从树上不知道什么掉下一个东西，这个呢就是蚕茧。那么他就拿那个手拉了一拉，就有丝出来。那么这个丝呢，就是说，好，这绸了。在罗马凯撒大帝的时候，那么中国有些丝绸就是传到罗马，就用中国的丝绸做了一个袍服，黄袍去看戏了。那么在戏院里呢，有好多大臣也在那儿，就看到这件黄袍呢，非常灿烂夺目，非常吸引人，大家的眼睛呢都盯着这件黄袍了，所以也没心思看戏了。那么这个故事呢，就说明，这个丝绸的看的是珍贵啊。
There were rumors in Rome that the Silk people were men of gigantic stature with red hair and blue eyes. Then came news of a city called Phinae, which produced the silk. In fact, the city was an empire, and the silk not just for shimmering dresses, it could even be an instrument for war. The story goes that the Emperor of Wu often lamented he'd not conquered two nearby states. To know the lie of their land, he commissioned Lady Zhao, the younger sister of his prime minister, to make a map showing their mountains, rivers, and villages. She began to embroider it on silk. As she sewed, it suddenly struck her that the warp and weft of the silk provided the ideal coordinates for a map grid. Thus goes the legend, a new accuracy was born. There was one huge difference between this and Ptolemy's maps. The Chinese grid was designed for a flat, not a round Earth. Earth, said the Chinese, was square like a chessboard. Some scholars challenged this idea. How could its four corners be fully covered? Would not the seas and earth slide off its square edges? But the orthodoxy stuck, as did Chinese introspection. China was in the center of the world. A few neighboring lands like Japan were acknowledged, but beyond were only barbarians. China believed herself so superior that she felt no need to make contact with other countries. There was plenty of food and an expanding network of canals for transport and irrigation. While Chinese ideas of the world were blinkered, the ability to map her own lands was unsurpassed. This stone carving made in the 13th century AD is a superbly accurate map of the silk city of Suzhou, the Venice of China. Back in the 3rd century, a new precision had been ordered by the government official Fai Su, the Chinese Ptolemy. In his writings, he banished absurdities, irrelevancies, and exaggerations from map-making. In their place, he gave strict instructions about angles, scale, and height. Paper was another Chinese first. It enabled rubbings to be taken from these carvings. The first printed maps appeared in China hundreds of years before the Gutenberg press started printing Bibles in Europe. All of this ingenuity was performed in the service of the emperor. Maps were a vital tool of government. If the empire could be precisely seen, it could also be controlled. Maps came in all shapes and sizes. Science was beauty, and beauty, science. For over 1,000 years, Chinese expertise was unrivaled. For back in Europe, the world created by Greek science was giving way to the dogma of a new religion. In the 4th century AD, Christianity became the religion of the Roman Empire. 100 years later, Rome was invaded by barbarians and destroyed. With the civilizations of Rome and Greece in tatters, the world created by ancient scientists like Claudius Ptolemy faded away. In its place, the early Christian leaders steered their flocks to the teachings of the Bible. God, not Greek science, would dictate the shape of the world. Some early Christians took their Bible studies to bizarre lengths. Most notorious was a merchant called Cosmas, who returned to Alexandria at the end of the 6th century after years of trading in the East. Cosmas had spent most of his working life in India. There he found a society whose ideas about the world were based totally on religion and the scriptures. The Jain religion saw the universe as a human body. The lower half was a series of hells ruled by wicked demons. The waste in the middle was Earth. Above were a series of heavens and a place where souls floated in infinite bliss. The world itself was a ring of continents and oceans made from sugarcane juice, wine, butter, milk, and whey. After his years in India, Cosmas retired to a monastery in the Egyptian desert. Fired by these religious visions from the East, he decided to shape his world from the Bible. Cosmas based it on St. Paul's statement that the tabernacle of Moses, the tent in which the prophet had lived in the wilderness, was a model of the earth. This was the result. Cosmas's crazy cosmos. A vast box like a traveling truck. Its lid, the vault of heaven from which God surveys his works below. At the north is a great mountain around which the sun moves, causing night to follow day. Above all, Cosmas brought back a flat earth. Greek science had said the world was round. Rubbish, said Cosmas. Just imagine what might happen if there really were people who lived on the other side of a globe. They would spend their whole life upside down, and, more likely than not, they'd end up falling off the earth. If you'd told Cosmas that 1,500 years later you could sunbathe on Bondi Beach in Australia without falling off the bottom of the world, he'd have said you were mad. In fact, the very idea of a fourth undiscovered continent, which Ptolemy had suggested, was anathema to Christians, for it went against the teachings of God. Had not the Bible said that after the flood, the world's 3 continents had been divided between Noah's 3 sons? These were awkward questions, but some priests did try to combine Greek learning with the Bible. In Spain, the 7th century Archbishop of Seville, Isidore, came up with a compromise world map. East was at the top of a simple round world with just Asia, Africa, and Europe, 1 continent for each of Noah's sons. But Isidore set little store by earthly concerns. He preferred to speculate on more exciting mysteries, like the exact location of paradise, the Garden of Eden.
Hizo una descripción maravillosa. Les voy a leer lo que escribió. El paraíso es un lugar que yace en el este, cuyo nombre es traducido del griego al latín como hortus, jardín, ya que tiene todo tipo de madera y árboles con fruta, teniendo incluso el árbol de la vida. No hace ni frío ni calor. Hay una temperatura de primavera. Desde el centro del jardín, una fuente se precipita regando todo el jardín y dividiéndose se convierte en el lugar de origen de los 4 ríos. Acercarse a este sitio le está prohibido al hombre tras su pecado, ya que ahora está rodeado de todos lados por una flama, como una espada, quiero decir, que está rodeada de un muro de fuego que llega hasta casi el cielo.
But where exactly was paradise? The quest to find it became the greatest wild goose chase of Christendom. Everyone was at it. Monks, sailors, travelers, explorers, and merchants. Some said it was an island in the Atlantic. Others that it lay off the coast of China. One of the best paradise stories happened just 100 years ago in the Seychelles Islands of the Indian Ocean. In 1881, the English soldier Charles Gordon was posted to the Seychelles. There he found time to pursue 2 lifelong interests.
One was religion, and he was a Bible fundamentalist. He believed that every word in the Bible was true, except occasionally he was able to prove it not true. And the other was surveying. As a Royal Engineer, he was a trained surveyor, and he had a lot of experience of exploring and map making in Central Africa. So these 2 interests led him irresistibly to the great puzzle of the time: where was the Garden of Eden?
First appearances must indeed have summoned thoughts of paradise, waterfalls, a blissful temperature, and a rainforest with some most peculiar trees.
This rainforest had in it a gigantic palm called a coco de mer, very remarkable tree, or rather two trees, because a male and a female. And then the male coco de mer had some peculiar growths on it, which I can only say with all possible delicacy resembled part of Adam's anatomy. And next door to it, a female tree had as fruit a huge sort of nut weighing 40 or 50 pounds. And Gordon noted this as it exactly resembled the belly and thighs of a woman, of Eve. How he knew that, I don't know, because he avoided women all his life, and certainly had never seen the genuine article, but anyway, he was absolutely certain of that.
So this became the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Gordon found a breadfruit tree, which became the tree of life. He noticed a serpent in the forest, and a man called Adam from a long line of Adams.
And all his evidence fitted together like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. And he was able to write to all his friends, sending photographs and anatomical and botanical drawings and maps, saying that the mystery was a mystery no longer. I have settled the Garden of Eden.
Paradise was one tantalizing detail in the map of the medieval Christian world. A more important influence was the needs of pilgrims.
Pilgrimage was becoming big business in the 12th century. The Crusaders had recently reconquered the Holy Land and made it available to Christian pilgrims. And with the increase in pilgrimage traffic came the guidebooks and the maps. One such map was produced by an English monk, Matthew Paris of St. Albans, in the 13th century.
In Matthew's medieval road atlas, the pilgrims started from the old St. Paul's in London. From there, he travelled to Canterbury, across the Channel into France. Then it was down through France and on to the southeast of Italy. There the pilgrim got on a boat for the journey's final stage to Jerusalem, the centre of the medieval world. Vézelay in northern France was a star attraction on Matthew's route. It was the ideal place for the world-weary pilgrim. Its cathedral seemed to reach towards the heavens themselves. Looking back at Earth below, the spiritual world did indeed seem to triumph over the physical. Here, undisturbed, the pilgrim could turn his attention to the sacred relics of Christendom, those pieces of cloth and bone which seemed the vital link to Christ and the saints.
This was what people had come to see, this small fragment of the body of St. Mary Magdalene. Mary, a penitent sinner like themselves, who had known Christ personally, who had washed his feet, dried those feet with her hair. To be in the presence of this fragment was almost like being in the presence of Christ himself. The emotions it engendered would have been absolutely overwhelming.
Matthew Paris's map could get you to the relics, but what about the world as a whole? By the 13th century, the medieval Christians were beginning to create a spectacular vision of the world. The beautifully carved sculpture over the entrance to Vézelay hinted at what was to come.
One of the things that most concerned people in the Middle Ages was the relationship between God and man and between heaven and earth. And we see that expressed here visually in the tympanum at Vézelay. Christ is instructing his apostles to go out and preach to people at the edges of the earth. And they are represented here, according to the folklore of classical antiquity, as the monstrous races. those men with dogs' heads who could only bark at each other, the people with ears so large that they could curl up in them and go to sleep, the pygmies who needed ladders to clamber onto horseback. This is the 12th century sculptural equivalent of the great world maps of the 13th century.
This beautiful miniature map in a 13th century book of Psalms is a copy of a great map which once hung in the palace of King Henry III of England. Jerusalem, the magnet for pilgrims, lies at the center, and the elusive paradise to the east. Behind a wall are the dreaded tribes of Gog and Magog, whom Christians feared would overrun their world. At the edges, the monstrous races, the essential ingredient to satisfy the ghoulish curiosity of the medieval masses. The world map owned by Hereford Cathedral had everything. It is geographical, the 3 continents with the Mediterranean Sea at the center. It shows all those strange races, like the Phoenici, whose enormous ears served as clothing. The Seapod, sheltering himself with one huge foot from the heat of the sun. The Gangenes, nourishing themselves on their only food, the scent of apples. And by contrast, the Essodines, who ate the flesh of their dead parents. There are the beasts like the ostrich, who eats iron. The Manticora, with a man's head and the body of a lion. And the mysterious unicorn. And finally, the biblical teachings. Lot's wife looking sadly back at Sodom and Gomorrah, submerged in stone. And in the last judgment, the wicked being dragged to the devil and the monster's jaws, the mouth of hell. There was one final element in medieval maps, the display of power. The pageantry of the Palio Festival in Siena, Italy, is a reminder of the city's glory 500 years ago.
Era un periodo di grande espansione territoriale per la Repubblica di Siena e di politica militare piuttosto aggressiva nei confronti delle vicinanze, tanto che alla metà del 300 appunto aveva conquistato, diciamo, la maggior parte del territorio che poi costituirà la Repubblica di Siena.
At this time, the Great Council of Siena, which met in this room, commissioned the famous painter Lorenzetti to paint a map. It was later destroyed, but once it showed Siena with all her possessions.
Era stato realizzato in senso, diciamo, simbolico, perché appunto doveva testimoniare della potenza di Siena, delle sue proprietà, dei suoi possessi al di fuori del territorio a lei vicino. E in qualche modo, secondo la mentalità medievale, il mondo, o comunque la porzione più importante del mondo, era appunto quella della propria patria.
A medieval world shaped by religion, myth, and power. But to where had the science of Claudius Ptolemy disappeared? The answer was here, Istanbul, once the city of Constantinople. The city was named after the Roman Emperor Constantine, who made it his headquarters and capital. Here he gathered treasures from all quarters of the Roman Empire, in Greece, Italy, and Egypt. Among them were the books of the Greek philosophers and scientists. At the end of the 13th century, there lived a monk called Maximus Planudes, who spent all his spare time from the rigors of monastic life scouring the bookshops of Constantinople's bazaars for the works of the ancients. Many had lain dusty and unread for centuries. Some had been gnawed by rats and were only rescued by the monk's painstaking restoration. Then, in 1295, he found the one book he had been seeking above all others, the Geography of Claudius Ptolemy. It was the geographic scoop of the millennium. For 1,000 years, Ptolemy's science had been appreciated and used only by the Arabs. Now, from his monastery in Constantinople, the Christian monk Planudes would reintroduce Ptolemy to those Christians of Europe who had for so long thought ancient science to be unworthy of a holy man's consideration. Planudes even wrote a poem to celebrate his great discovery. When the sun rises, all the sheen of stars is covered, and the moon forthwith draws back its ray of light. So this geography, now rediscovered, sheds on earlier ones a veil of night. "100 years later, the emperor in Constantinople sent a diplomat called Manuel Chrysoloras to Italy. Chrysoloras' mission was to seek allies in Venice and Florence against the Ottoman Turks who were threatening Constantinople. He took with him Ptolemy's Geography as a present. Chrysoloras was not the only one to leave. It was a time of exodus from the city which had for so long been the focal point of the Eastern Roman Empire. This flight had one bonus. The ancient wisdom which had lain hidden in the East for so long was now on its way to Italy and the rest of Europe to become the engine of the Renaissance, the revival of classical learning. For the Christians left behind in Constantinople, disaster struck, and in May 1453, the city fell to the Turks. But in Italy, it was a time of celebration, the threshold of the Renaissance. Ptolemy's geography had cast a blinding shaft of light on ideas about the world. Planudes' own manuscript copy was now in the possession of the Pope at the Vatican. Here for posterity was Planudes' handwriting to introduce it. Ptolemy's vision of the world was restored. With the aid of the printing press, it would spread throughout Europe. In the southern German town of Ulm, a famous edition was printed in 1486. Ptolemy went on sale in the bookshops. Italy, Arabia, India, Scandinavia, Britain and Ireland. Ptolemy's readmission to the Christian world was not grudging. It was now celebrated, not just in mind, but in body too. In the late 15th century, the people of Ulm built their cathedral choir stalls. They decided that pride of place should be given not to biblical figures, but to the geniuses of the ancient world. Among them was Pythagoras, and, holding his globe triumphantly aloft, Claudius Ptolemy himself. the worlds of God and ancient science had come together. But soon, new discoveries would change everything. The exotic East was within the grasp of European sailors. Great swathes of the three known continents were on the verge of being opened up. A new world was about to be discovered with new people, new customs, and different ideas about the universe. Ptolemy himself had always wanted to create a complete picture of the world, but he lacked the necessary information. Now, using the techniques he laid down, and driven by the dawning science of the Renaissance and the European search for new empires, his successors would reveal the true shape of the world. We've just seen a map 400 years old, on which the inhabitants of an ancient village placed themselves at the very center of their universe, and how religious and mystical theories regarding the shape of the world abounded. The Babylonians recorded the earth as flat. The shadow of the moon during a lunar eclipse proved it was a sphere. Taking off from there, our series will show how maps have helped us to shape, understand, discover, and possess the world we know today. I'm here in the map room of the New York Public Library. This room alone houses a unique collection of nearly 400,000 maps dating from the 17th century to the present. And people come here for a variety of reasons. They come to trace their genealogy. The changes in Eastern Europe created great interest in ties to other countries and sparked a search for roots. Hikers use maps to find the most rewarding and scenic trails. City officials use the collection to research the environmental impact of major urban development projects. Construction workers come in with their boots on to check out the water map. This 125-year-old map charts the underground of New York City with its hidden streams and its landfills. It can accurately locate present-day problems, from the major flooding of a building foundation to a leak in the basement. And in the 16th and 17th centuries, when Spanish galleons sank off the Florida shores, the shipwrecks were noted on maps made for the king. And today, voyagers and divers alike come here to scour these ancient maps in search of sunken treasure. Theater people, designers, actors, playwrights use the collection in the most ingenious ways. For a 1979 revival of Oklahoma, scenic designers researched turn-of-the-century maps. These maps became the basis for the curtain that opened the show. On a much simpler level, and almost as a matter of course, we rely on maps of one kind or another to get us through the day, to help us understand where we are, where we're going, how to get there. Buried treasure notwithstanding, people consult maps as part of their everyday routine. Planning a trip, going by plane, catching a bus, or taking the car. What exit do we take? What will the road be like? How many miles to go until we eat? Automobile clubs prepare triptychs to show us how to get out of town. Bus and subway maps show us how to get around town. Whatever our destination, we rely on maps to locate hotels, shops, theater, and museums. Maps can be vital. This one could save your life. Or convenient. This one can save you from getting wet. Or symbolic. Now, you may not think of these as maps, but they certainly direct you to the right place. Would it be possible to get through a day without using a map? I think not. Next week, we'll take to the high seas. We'll travel to China, where the first compass was invented, and explore the rivalry between Italy, Portugal, and Spain to find a direct route to the Spice Islands. The rivalry was so intense that spies were dispatched, bribes were offered, and murder committed to capture the secrets of the sea. I'm Patrick Stewart, for the shape of the world.